Clara Harrington thought her partner, Liam Sterling, was asleep. Sprawled on the plush velvet sofa in her parents' opulent living room, his breathing was deep and even, one arm draped over his eyes to block the intrusive afternoon light filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows. He looked to her like a portrait of inaction, a man at rest, perpetually. This image, a blend of peacefulness and what she had come to see as a profound lack of ambition, solidified the decision that had been hardening in her heart for weeks. What she didn't know was that behind the mask of sleep, Liam was wide awake. Every muscle in his body was coiled with a tension that belied his serene posture. His hearing, sharpened by adrenaline, was focused on the hushed, venomous whispers exchanged between Clara and her brother Julian, who had just entered the room. They thought him an obstacle, a simple, decent, but ultimately unimpressive man holding back the ascent of the great Harrington family. They had no idea he was not an obstacle. He was the cliff edge they were gleefully dancing towards, and he was about to witness the final, fatal misstep that would send them plunging into the abyss. The conversation he was about to overhear would not end Clara's life with a sudden, merciful bang, but with the quiet, devastating precision of a grand cathedral collapsing in on its own hollow foundations. Within a week, everything she believed to be true about her world, her family, and the man she claimed to love would be dismantled, piece by agonizing piece. Before we witness the full extent of that collapse, we'd love to know where you're joining us from. Are you watching from a bustling city, a quiet town, or somewhere in between? Let us know in the comments below. It's always incredible to see how far these stories travel. Now, grab a seat because the quiet man on the sofa is about to bring the entire house down. He's just always tired. Julian's voice was a low sneer, dripping with the casual cruelty of a man who had never known a day of genuine struggle. He stood by the marble fireplace, swirling a glass of amber liquid that probably cost more than Liam's monthly grocery bill. Don't you want a man with some fire, Clara? Someone who wants to build an empire, not just what is it he does again? Draws blueprints for other people's houses? Clara sighed, a sound of theatrical exasperation meant for her brother's ears alone. He's an architect, Julian. A good one, I think. He's just content. It's infuriating. She walked over to the window, her silhouette framed against the manicured gardens of the Harrington estate. Dad's right. I'm settling. We're having that dinner on Saturday, the one I told you about. We're going to lay it all out for him. An ultimatum. Liam's heart, which had been a slow, steady drum, began to beat a harder, more dangerous rhythm. An ultimatum. The word hung in the air, clinical and cold. Julian chuckled, a dry, rustling sound. Good. It's about time. What's the offer? Dad's special projects coordinator position in the mailroom? The derision was thick, undisguised. Something like that, Clara admitted, her voice dropping even lower. A chance to get his foot in the door at Harrington Corp, to show some initiative. If he says no, well, then he's not the man I thought he was, and I'll have to make a change. He'll say no, Julian said with absolute certainty. Men like him are terrified of real pressure. They like their little, manageable lives. But it's for the best, sis. You're a Harrington. You need a partner who enhances the brand, not one who dilutes it. The brand. Liam felt a bitter taste rise in his throat. That's what this was about. Not love, not partnership, not shared dreams. It was about brand management. He had spent 2 years of his life with a woman who viewed their relationship as a corporate merger, and he was failing to provide an adequate return on investment. He remained perfectly still, listening as they moved on to discuss the family's latest triumph, a hostile takeover of a promising, smaller firm. They spoke of assets and leverage, of crushing the competition. They were sharks, circling what they thought was a wounded seal, never once considering that the seal might be a submarine in disguise. As their footsteps receded and the heavy oak door clicked shut, Leaving him in silence, Liam finally moved. He slowly lowered his arm from his face, his eyes open and startlingly clear. There was no anger in them, not yet. There was only a profound, chilling clarity. He had given them every chance to see him, the real him. He had intentionally lived a simple life, a test to see if he could be valued for his character rather than his balance sheet. The results of that experiment were now in, and they were conclusive. He reached into the inside pocket of his simple linen jacket, and his fingers brushed against the worn corner of a small, unassuming object, a keycard. It was plain white with no logo. It opened the door to a life the Harringtons couldn't even imagine. He had hoped he would never have to use it to prove his worth. Now he knew he had no other choice. The ultimatum was coming on Saturday, but the real judgment had already been delivered. The beginning, like most beginnings, had been deceptively simple. Liam and Clara had met at a charity gala, an event he'd attended at the behest of a friend, and she as a social obligation. He was unassuming in a well-fitting but unremarkable suit, and she was a supernova in couture silk. He'd been standing near a display of architectural models for a new children's hospital, lost in thought, when she approached him. "You look like you either designed these or you're planning to steal one," she'd said, her smile both charming and challenging. He'd laughed, a genuine, warm sound that seemed to surprise her. "Just admiring the craft," he'd replied. They talked for hours. He spoke of his passion for creating spaces that felt like home, of the quiet satisfaction of seeing a drawing become a physical reality. He was intelligent, articulate, and possessed a calm self-assurance she found magnetic. He never mentioned the name of his firm, only that he was part of a small, collaborative practice. For her part, Clara was dazzling. She was witty, ambitious, and moved through the world with the frictionless ease of someone for whom all doors had always been open. Liam saw, or wanted to see, a fire in her that wasn't just about status, but about making a mark on the world. He allowed himself to believe her fascination with his simple passion was genuine. He chose, very deliberately, to keep his other life separate. Liam Sterling, the quiet architect, was the man he wanted to be loved as. The other Liam, the founder and sole proprietor of Sterling Holdings, a private, multi-billion-dollar global investment firm with interests in technology, sustainable energy, and, ironically, high-end real estate development, was a complication. That Liam had inherited a significant fortune from his grandfather, a brilliant but reclusive engineer, and had spent the last 15 years multiplying it with a savant-like genius for market prediction. He lived not in the modest apartment Clara had visited, but in a sprawling penthouse downtown that his staff maintained in his absence. His car was not the reliable 10-year-old sedan he drove on their dates, but a collection of vintage vehicles housed in a private, climate-controlled garage. He kept his life partitioned, a silent experiment in human nature. He wanted to find a partner who could love the blueprint of the man, not the finished, gilded skyscraper. The first cracks in the facade of their relationship appeared during the first dinner with her family. The Harrington estate was less a home and more a monument to wealth. Marble floors gleamed under the light of chandeliers that looked like captured constellations. Arthur Harrington, Clara's father, was a man carved from granite and arrogance. He had the piercing eyes of a predator and a handshake that was more of an assertion of dominance than a greeting. Eleanor, her mother, was elegant, brittle, and perpetually assessing everyone's value. And Julian, her brother, radiated a smug, unearned confidence. They sat around a dining table so long it felt like they should communicate via telegram. The questioning began, couched in politeness but sharp as shrapnel. "So, Liam," Arthur had boomed, after dismissing Liam's thoughts on a recent municipal project. "Clara tells us you're an architect, a noble profession. For a certain type of man, do you work for one of the big firms? SOM? Gensler?" "No, sir," Liam had replied calmly, taking a sip of water. "I'm part of a smaller, independent practice. We focus on bespoke residential and community projects. Arthur had shared a look with Julian. It was fleeting, but it was enough. The look said, small time. Bespoke, Arthur repeated, tasting the word as if it were a cheap wine. Quaint. But there's no real money in quaint, is there? The real money is in scale. Skyscrapers, global contracts. That's where the power is. He leaned forward, his eyes pinning Liam to his chair. A man's legacy is the size of the shadow he casts, son. Remember that. Throughout the entire exchange, Clara had remained silent. She offered a weak, apologetic smile when her father wasn't looking, but she did not defend Liam's passion. She did not say that his work had meaning regardless of its scale. She was a silent enabler, her inaction a quiet endorsement of her father's condescending worldview. Liam felt a knot tighten in his stomach. Under the table, out of sight, his hand rested on the simple, worn leather portfolio he'd brought with him, containing sketches for a new project. Inside that portfolio, in a hidden sleeve, were documents that could buy and sell Arthur Harrington's entire company a dozen times over. He touched the soft leather, a talisman of his hidden truth. He was casting a shadow so vast Arthur couldn't even comprehend its edges. But he was doing it from a place of quiet integrity, not ostentatious pride. That night, driving home in his humble sedan, the first chill of doubt entered his heart. He was beginning to suspect that for the Harringtons, and perhaps for Clara too, a man's worth wasn't measured by his character, his kindness, or his talent. It was measured in square footage and stock prices. And in that ledger, Liam Sterling, the architect, was coming up dangerously short. The Saturday of the ultimatum arrived like a storm cloud on the horizon. The week leading up to it had been a masterclass in passive aggression. Clara had become distant, her conversations with Liam punctuated by sighs and wistful comments about friends whose partners were really taking off. She left brochures for luxury cars on the coffee table and circled executive job listings in the newspaper. It was a clumsy, transparent campaign to make him feel inadequate, to soften him up for the final blow. Liam observed it all with the detached curiosity of a scientist watching a predictable chemical reaction. He played his part perfectly, appearing thoughtful, a little downtrodden, and completely oblivious to the conspiracy closing in around him. The dinner was at the Harrington estate, the designated arena for all family power plays. The air was thick with expectation. Arthur, Eleanor, Julian, and Clara were seated when he arrived, arranged like a tribunal. They greeted him with the forced, thin-lipped smiles of people about to perform an unpleasant but necessary duty. "Liam, thank you for coming," Arthur began, dispensing with any pretense of social nicety. He gestured for Liam to sit in the one empty chair, directly across from him, the accused in the dock. "We, as a family, have been doing some thinking. About you and Clara. About the future." Liam simply nodded, his hands resting calmly in his lap. He met Arthur's gaze without flinching. "I'm listening." The humiliation began in earnest. It was a coordinated assault. Julian started, leaning back in his chair with a smirk. "Look, Liam, I'll be blunt. My sister is a thoroughbred. She needs to be with someone who can keep up. We see you driving that old car, living in that tiny apartment. There's no shame in it, but it's just not her world. It's not our world." Next was Eleanor. She adopted a tone of sympathetic concern that was more insulting than Julian's open contempt. She slid a book across the polished mahogany table towards him. The title gleamed under the chandelier light, "Unleash Your Inner Titan, a Guide to Executive Ambition." "I found this and thought of you, dear," she said, her voice like honey laced with arsenic. "Sometimes we just need a little push to find our drive, a new perspective." Liam looked at the book. He looked at Eleanor's perfectly manicured hand resting near it. He felt the gazes of all four of them on him, waiting for him to bristle, to argue, to show some sign of weakness. He did none of those things. He merely inclined his head. That's very thoughtful of you, Eleanor. Finally, it was Arthur's turn. He was the closer. He steepled his fingers, his expression one of magnanimous authority. Liam, we like you. You're a decent fellow. But decency doesn't pay the bills. It doesn't build a legacy. Clara deserves a certain quality of life, a certain kind of partner. We're worried you're not on that trajectory. He paused for dramatic effect. So, I'm going to make you an offer, a lifeline, if you will. I have an opening at Harrington Corp. It's an entry-level position in the Strategic Development Department. You'd be fetching coffee, making copies, learning the business from the ground up. But it's a foot in the door, a real door to a real future. He let the offer hang in the air, the ultimate act of condescension. He was offering a man who secretly managed a global empire a job as an office boy. Through it all, Clara watched, her expression a carefully constructed mask of neutrality. She was the silent judge, waiting to see if the condemned man would accept his sentence with gratitude. Liam let the silence stretch. He looked at each of them in turn, Julian's smugness, Eleanor's pity, Arthur's arrogance, and Clara's expectant silence. He saw them not as people, but as components of a machine built on vanity and greed. He had heard their whispers. He had endured their insults. He had accepted their pity. His patience, a reservoir he'd once thought bottomless, had finally run dry. After the dinner, back in the quiet of his real home, the penthouse that overlooked the entire city, the glittering lights a testament to a world they couldn't see, he made a phone call. The voice on the other end was crisp and efficient. "Marcus," Liam said, his own voice devoid of any emotion. "It's Liam." "Everything all right, boss?" Marcus Thorne was more than an associate. He was the COO of Sterling Holdings, and one of the few people who knew the full extent of Liam's dual life. "Everything is proceeding as predicted," Liam said, walking over to the vast window. He looked down at the distant lights of the Harrington estate in the wealthy suburbs. "It's time. Begin the preparations we discussed. Phase 1. And Marcus, make it quiet. I want them to feel the ground shifting before they hear the earthquake." "Consider it done," Marcus replied. "They won't know what hit them." Liam ended the call and stood there for a long time, the city spread out before him like a circuit board. The Harringtons believed they were playing chess and that he was a pawn to be sacrificed. They had no idea he was the one who owned the entire board, and he was about to flip it over. The week that followed was a study in quiet before the storm. The Harringtons were flush with victory. They believed they had successfully cornered Liam, presenting him with a choice that, either way, would solve their problem. If he accepted Arthur's demeaning offer, he would be under their control, a project to be molded. If he refused, Clara would have the perfect, family-sanctioned excuse to cast him aside as a man with no ambition. They had in their minds one. Clara's calls to Liam were tinged with a new, confident impatience. "Have you thought about my father's offer, Liam?" she'd ask, her tone suggesting it was a foregone conclusion. "It's an incredible opportunity, you know, not one he offers to just anyone." Liam, for his part, was a model of placid contemplation. "I'm giving it the serious consideration it deserves, Clara," he would reply, his voice so calm and measured that it infuriated her. He knew that his calm was being misinterpreted as weakness, as the paralysis of a man overwhelmed by a choice too big for him. It was a perfect camouflage. Meanwhile, in the gleaming steel and glass towers of the financial district, Marcus Thorne was executing Liam's orders with surgical precision. The first phase was subtle. Marcus began making quiet inquiries into the financial health of Harrington Corp. He initiated contact with the banks that held Arthur's substantial business loans, using proxies and shell corporations under the Sterling Holdings umbrella. He wasn't buying the debt yet, that would come later. For now, he was simply gathering intelligence, mapping out every one of Arthur's financial vulnerabilities. He was like a demolition expert tracing the load-bearing walls of a building, identifying the precise points where the charges needed to be placed for a controlled and total collapse. The Harringtons, blind to the storm gathering on their horizon, were entirely focused on their own perceived masterstroke, the acquisition of a small but fiercely innovative architectural firm named Ethelred Designs. Arthur and Julian spoke of it constantly, their voices giddy with the thrill of the hunt. "Their portfolio is incredible," Julian bragged to Clara over the phone, a conversation she later relayed to Liam, assuming he would be impressed or perhaps intimidated. "They're at the cutting edge of sustainable design. We're getting them for a steal. Dad's contact on the inside says their founder is some recluse who's lost interest. We'll absorb their IP, fire most of their staff, and rebrand their best projects under the Harrington banner. It's going to be huge." Liam listened to this, a faint, unreadable smile on his face. Ethelred Designs. He had founded the firm 10 years ago under a pseudonym, a passion project where he and a small team of brilliant, hand-picked architects could work without the pressures of commercialism. It was his creative sanctuary. The recluse founder was him. The contact on the inside was a junior executive he had planted months ago, knowing Arthur's predatory nature would eventually lead him into this very trap. The Harringtons thought they were buying a company. In reality, they were walking into an elaborately constructed snare, baited with their own greed. Liam spent that week in quiet ritual. He didn't go to the small office Clara knew. Instead, he worked from his penthouse, his command center. He meticulously reviewed the financial dossiers Marcus was compiling on Harrington Corp. He read every line of the false acquisition proposal his own team had leaked to Arthur. He was a general preparing for a battle that his enemy didn't even know was coming. The day before the final meeting, he took out the simple, dark gray suit he planned to wear. It was impeccably tailored, but understated. He polished his leather shoes, the motions slow and methodical. Each circular buff was a meditation, a moment to center himself. This wasn't about revenge. Revenge was a hot, messy emotion. This was about justice. It was about realigning a world that the Harringtons had tried to bend to their own selfish will. He laid out the suit, the polished shoes, and a crisp white shirt. Next to them, he placed his old, worn leather portfolio. It looked out of place amidst the perfection, a symbol of the humble man he had pretended to be. But inside it now contained the instruments of their undoing. The deed of ownership for Ethelred Designs, a summary of Sterling Holdings' assets, and the keycard to his real life. The trap was set. The bait was taken. All that was left was for the arrogant hunters to walk into the cage. Clara called him on Friday evening. Her voice was brittle, the false patience gone. "Dad has called a family meeting for tomorrow at noon. At the house. He expects your final answer, Liam. This is it. Don't be late." The line went dead before he could reply. He didn't need to. He looked out at the city lights, a vast and glittering expanse. Tomorrow, he thought. Tomorrow the brand is reevaluated. The air in the Harrington living room was static with self-importance. Arthur stood by the fireplace, assuming his usual position of patriarchal authority. Eleanor was perched on the edge of a brocade armchair, her posture radiating judgment. Julian lounged on the sofa, the same one Liam had occupied a week earlier, affecting an air of bored superiority. And Clara stood slightly apart, a nervous energy humming around her as she smoothed the wrinkles from her silk blouse. They were a tableau of privilege, waiting for the final act of a play they believed they had written and directed. Liam arrived at precisely noon. He was not early, which would suggest eagerness, nor was he late, which would suggest disrespect. He was punctual, precise. He walked in wearing the simple gray suit, carrying the old leather portfolio. He looked exactly as they expected him to look, a man walking toward his own sentencing. "Liam," Arthur said, his voice a low rumble. "Sit." He gestured again to the lone chair, the hot seat. Liam did as he was told, placing the portfolio on the floor beside him. He met Arthur's gaze, then let his eyes travel to each of them in turn. He held their gazes for a moment longer than was comfortable, a silent cataloging. "We'll get straight to the point," Arthur continued, clasping his hands behind his back. "I made you a generous offer, a chance to build a real career, to provide for my daughter in the manner to which she should become accustomed, a chance to become part of something significant. We have been waiting for your answer." Liam remained silent, letting the weight of their expectation fill the room. He could feel their collective will pressing in on him, urging him to be grateful, to be humbled, to accept the scraps from their table. "Well?" Julian prompted, unable to contain his impatience. "Cat got your tongue? It's a simple yes or no." Liam finally shifted his posture, leaning forward slightly. The movement was small, but it changed the energy in the room. It was not the posture of a supplicant, but of a speaker about to take the lectern. "Before I answer your question," he began, his voice calm and even, devoid of the anxiety they anticipated, "I have a few of my own, if you'll indulge me." Arthur's eyes narrowed. This was not part of the script. "What is this?" "A request for clarity," Liam said smoothly. He turned his head to look directly at Clara. "You and I have been together for 2 years. In all that time, have I ever been unkind to you? Have I ever disrespected you? Have I ever failed to support you in your own ambitions?" Clara was taken aback, flustered by the directness. "Well, no, but that's not the point." "Isn't it?" Liam's voice was still quiet, but it had an edge now, a blade being unsheathed. He turned to Julian. "You mocked my car, a 10-year-old sedan. Did you ever consider that its value to me might not be monetary?" Julian scoffed. "Here we go, sentimental nonsense." Liam ignored him, turning to Eleanor. "You gave me a book on ambition, assuming I have none. Did you ever ask me what I am ambitious for?" He then fixed his gaze on Arthur. "And you offered me a job fetching coffee, assuming my professional life is a failure. Did you ever, in all our conversations, ask to see my work? Did you ever show a flicker of genuine interest in the craft I have dedicated my life to?" A heavy silence descended. Liam's questions, calm and logical, were like stones dropped into a still pond, the ripples of their implications spreading outwards. He was no longer the accused, he was the prosecutor. "This is absurd," Arthur finally sputtered, his face reddening. "We are trying to help you, and you respond with these impertinent questions. Your answer, boy. Now, yes or no?" Liam held his gaze. "The answer is no." The words landed with quiet finality. Clara flinched as if struck. Julian smirked, his prediction fulfilled. Arthur's face hardened into a mask of cold fury. "Fine," Arthur snapped. "Then you have made your choice, and you have made Clara's choice for her. This relationship is over. You are not the man for my daughter. You have no vision, no drive, no future." Liam nodded slowly, as if accepting this verdict. "You speak a great deal about vision, Arthur." He then bent down and picked up his worn leather portfolio. He placed it on his lap, his fingers resting on the clasp. The atmosphere in the room grew tense, expectant. "Let's talk about vision." The confrontation had begun, but it was not the one the Harringtons had planned. Liam's fingers moved to the clasp of the portfolio. The soft click as it opened was the only sound in the suffocatingly quiet room. He did not hurry. He moved with a deliberate, methodical grace that was unnerving. The Harringtons watched, a mixture of contempt and curiosity on their faces, as if expecting him to pull out a few meager drawings of a suburban deck. He reached inside and withdrew a single, simple document. He didn't look at it. His eyes were fixed on Julian. "Julian," he said, his voice as calm as a frozen lake, "you were concerned about my car, the 10-year-old sedan. You're right, it's not flashy. It's the first thing I bought with my own money after I sold my first software patent for network optimization. I was 22. The sale was for 7 figures. I keep the car to remind me that value is not always visible." Julian's smirk faltered. A flicker of confusion crossed his face. What are you talking about? Software patent? Liam ignored him, turning his attention to Eleanor. He gestured with the document. Eleanor, your book on ambition was a thoughtful, if misguided gesture. My ambition isn't for a corner office. My ambition was to build a company that could fund philanthropic endeavors without ever needing to ask for a single donation. He paused, letting the words settle. Last year, the foundation I established and privately fund built 3 schools in underserved communities and a state-of-the-art medical clinic in a developing nation. That is my ambition. Eleanor's poised expression began to crumble. She stared at him, her mouth slightly agape. The man she had pitied, the project she had wanted to fix, was speaking a language she didn't understand. Finally, Liam's gaze settled on Arthur. The patriarch's face was a thundercloud of disbelief and rage. This is a fantasy, Arthur growled. You're a draftsman, a glorified builder of sheds. Am I? Liam's voice was soft, but it cut through Arthur's bluster like a diamond through glass. You speak of legacy, Arthur, of building empires. You're very excited about your acquisition of Ethelred Designs. At the mention of the firm, both Arthur and Julian straightened up, a flicker of their old arrogance returning. This was their territory. We are, Julian said, a sneer returning to his voice. It's a done deal. We're closing next week. No, you're not, Liam said simply. He slid the document across the coffee table towards Arthur. It glided over the polished wood and came to a stop before him. You can't acquire a company from a junior executive who has no authority to sell, especially when you're trying to acquire it from its sole founder and owner. Arthur stared down at the paper. It was a deed of incorporation. At the top, in clear block letters, was the name, Ethelred Designs. And at the bottom, listed as founder and sole proprietor, was another name, Liam Sterling. A strangled sound escaped Julian's throat. He snatched the paper from the table. His eyes scanned it, his face draining of all color. This is impossible. Is it? Liam continued, his voice relentless. You've spent the last 3 weeks negotiating with a man named David Chen, a bright young man. He's one of my most promising junior analysts at Sterling Holdings. The name landed in the room like a physical blow. Sterling Holdings. It wasn't a name that appeared in the society pages or on the sides of buildings. It was a name spoken in quiet, reverent tones in the highest echelons of global finance. A ghost, a myth, a private, monstrously successful investment firm known for its silent, strategic acquisitions and its almost supernatural ability to predict market shifts. Arthur Harrington knew the name. Every titan of industry knew the name. It was a name associated with terrifying, invisible power. Clara, who had been frozen in place, finally spoke. Her voice was a hoarse whisper. Liam, what is he talking about? Liam finally looked at her. The warmth she had once known in his eyes was gone, replaced by a cold, clear light of judgment. He is talking about the man you never bothered to see, Clara. He reached back into the portfolio and pulled out a single, plain white keycard. He tossed it onto the table. It skittered to a halt next to a porcelain statuette. That is the key to my home. Not the apartment you've been to. My home. The penthouse at the top of the Citadel building. He pulled out another document, a financial summary. And this is a severely abbreviated summary of the assets of the company I own. The company whose name, you'll notice, is Sterling. Arthur looked as if he had been punched. The bluster, the arrogance, the lifetime of unshakable confidence, it all evaporated in an instant, leaving behind a gray, sagging facsimile of the man he had been moments before. He understood. He understood the scale of his miscalculation. He had been posturing in front of a god, swaggering about the size of his hill while standing at the foot of Mount Everest. The deal for Ethelred Designs, Liam said, his voice now devoid of all inflection, was a trap, a diagnostic. I wanted to see how far your greed would take you. You didn't disappoint. He stood up, the movement fluid and final. You delivered an ultimatum to me. Now, I'll deliver one to you. You will cease all contact with me. You will forget the name Aethelred Designs, and you will reflect on the fact that you tried to destroy a man for not being wealthy enough, without ever realizing he could have bought and sold your entire world on a whim. The revelation was complete. The quiet man on the sofa had brought the house down without raising his voice. The silence that followed Liam's speech was more profound than any shouting match could ever be. It was the silence of a universe being reordered. The Harringtons were statues carved from shock, their faces locked in masks of disbelief. Arthur's ruddy complexion had turned a pasty, sickly gray. Julian was staring at the documents on the table as if they were venomous snakes. Eleanor had a hand pressed to her chest, her breathing shallow. And Clara looked at Liam as if he were a complete stranger. The quiet, gentle, unambitious man she had tolerated and planned to discard had been a phantom. In his place stood this titan, this architect of empires whose power was so vast, it was incomprehensible. Just as Arthur opened his mouth to utter what would have surely been a weak, sputtering denial, the doorbell chimed. The sound was incongruously polite in the charged atmosphere. A moment later, the family's housekeeper appeared at the door to the living room, her expression nervous. "Mr. Harrington, sir, there's a Mr. Marcus Thorne here to see you. He says it's urgent." Arthur's head snapped up. Marcus Thorne. The name was another jolt to his system. Thorne was a legend in the financial world, the famously sharp and ruthless COO of Sterling Holdings. He was a man Arthur had dreamed of meeting, a man whose favor he would have paid millions to curry. "Send him in," Arthur croaked, his mind reeling. What was happening? Marcus Thorne entered the room. He was tall, impeccably dressed in a dark suit, with eyes that seemed to take in everything and give away nothing. He radiated an aura of quiet, absolute power that made Arthur Harrington's bluster look like a child's tantrum. He completely ignored the Harringtons. His eyes went straight to Liam. "Liam," he said, his voice respectful, professional. "Phase 1 is complete. The initial inquiries have had the desired effect. Their credit lines are tightening, as requested." He handed Liam a slim tablet. Liam took it, glancing at the screen. He nodded. "Thank you, Marcus." Then, and only then, did Marcus Thorne turn his gaze upon Arthur Harrington. "Arthur," he said, his tone dropping several degrees, "I believe you've met my client and the chairman of my board, Mr. Liam Sterling." The final piece clicked into place with an audible gasp from Eleanor. Client, chairman, the connection was undeniable, the truth absolute and devastating. Arthur Harrington, who prided himself on his connections and his knowledge of the players in his world, had not only insulted a billionaire, he had insulted the billionaire, the quiet kingmaker of the entire financial landscape. He had offered a mailroom job to the man who employed Marcus Thorne. The absurdity of it was so immense it bordered on madness. I don't understand," Clara whispered, taking a hesitant step towards Liam. Her face was a canvas of confusion and a dawning, desperate hope. She reached out to touch his arm. "Liam, why didn't you tell me?" Liam moved his arm away before her fingers could make contact. The small movement was a rejection more total than any shout. He looked at her, and for the first time she saw not anger, but a deep, profound disappointment. "Tell you what, Clara?" he asked, his voice genuinely curious. "That my net worth exceeds the GDP of a small country? That the small practice I work with is a boutique firm I own that takes on only passion projects? Which part of the truth would have made you love me? Or would it just have made me a more suitable accessory for the Harrington brand?" The question was a moral mirror, forcing her to see the ugly reflection of her own motivations. Her hand dropped to her side. She had no answer. All her reasons for leaving him, his lack of ambition, his simple life, his failure to impress her father, were built on a foundation of lies. But the most damning lie was the one she had told herself, that she loved him. She hadn't loved Liam Sterling, the man. She had been repulsed by him. She would only have loved Liam Sterling, the chairman of Sterling Holdings. My company, Arthur stammered, his mind finally catching up to the immediate, terrifying consequences. The credit lines? What have you done? I haven't done anything, Arthur, Liam said, turning his cold gaze back to the patriarch. Not yet. I've simply revealed myself. Your company, as it turns out, is a house of cards built on risky leverage and overextended credit. A slight breeze was all it took to make it wobble. You see, men who are truly powerful don't need to boast about the shadow they cast. Their influence is like gravity. It's silent, it's invisible, but it holds everything together. Or, when removed, allows it all to fly apart. He gestured for Marcus to precede him out of the room. He walked to the doorway, then paused and looked back at the shattered family. You wanted me to have a future, he said to Arthur. Don't worry, I have one. Now I suggest you start worrying about yours. He turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing in the cavernous hall, leaving behind the ruins of a dynasty that had been brought down by its own arrogance. The days that followed the revelation were a slow-motion demolition. Liam did not actively seek to crush the Harringtons. He didn't have to. As he'd told Arthur, he simply removed the invisible support structure that their world had unknowingly rested upon. Harrington Corp's planned acquisition of Ethelred Designs had been announced to their investors and creditors as a major coup, a sign of aggressive growth. The deal's sudden, inexplicable evaporation sent shockwaves through their financial ecosystem. The banks that Marcus Thorne had quietly inquired with were now spooked. They called in their risk assessment teams. Looking at Harrington Corp's books, without the promise of the Ethelred acquisition, they saw what Liam had seen: a company dangerously over-leveraged, propped up by bravado and debt. The calls began. First, it was a request for a meeting with Arthur. Then, it was a formal review of his credit lines. Within 2 weeks, the bank that held the largest portion of his debt pulled their funding, triggering a cascade of similar actions from other creditors. The empire began to crumble. Harrington Corp, once a predator, was now prey. Competitors who had long chafed under Arthur's arrogance began circling, picking off his most valuable assets for pennies on the dollar. Julian, who had been the heir apparent, was disgraced. The done deal that had evaporated in his face made him a laughingstock in the industry. He was fired from his own family's company by the new board installed by the creditors. A humiliation so complete it was almost poetic. The personal fallout was just as devastating. The Harrington estate, the monument to their wealth, was the first thing to go, sold to cover a fraction of their debts. They moved into a modest townhouse in a respectable but far from opulent suburb, a home smaller than Liam's simple apartment that they had so often derided. The European cars were repossessed. The couture clothes were consigned. Eleanor Harrington, who had judged people on their brand, was now forced to live as a no-name. Through it all, Liam remained a ghost. He issued no statements, made no public moves. The financial world buzzed with rumors about the sudden collapse of Harrington Corp, but only a handful of people knew the truth. To the world, it looked like Arthur Harrington had simply overplayed his hand and lost. The justice was silent, invisible, just like Liam's power had been. Clara was caught in the wreckage. Her world had not just been turned upside down, it had been revealed as a hollow stage set. She tried to contact Liam, leaving dozens of desperate, rambling voicemails. They were a torrent of apologies, excuses, and pleas. Liam, I'm so sorry. I was blind. I was stupid. I was so caught up in my family's expectations, one message said. I love you. I know I do. I loved you before I knew, another claimed, a statement so transparently false it was painful to hear. We can fix this. I don't care about the money. I just want you, she pleaded in a third, her voice cracking with tears. But her tears were not for the man she had lost. They were for the life she had lost. She was mourning the dream, not the person. Liam listened to the first few messages with a clinical detachment, then instructed his assistant to delete the rest. He knew her apologies were born of desperation, not genuine remorse. He posed the moral mirror to himself. If he were to lose everything tomorrow, would she still be there? He knew the answer was no. The foundation of their relationship was sand, and the tide had come in. He had to make a choice. He could, with a single phone call, rescue her family. He could restore their wealth, their status, their pride. A part of him, the kind and decent part they had mistaken for weakness, felt a pang of pity for them. But the other part of him, the part that valued integrity above all else, knew that to do so would be to validate their entire worldview. It would teach them nothing. It would be a rescue without redemption. He finally responded to Clara, not with a phone call, but with a single typed letter sent by a courier. It was short and precise. Clara, your apologies are for the consequences, not for the actions. You mourn the loss of a future you believe my wealth could have provided, not the loss of the man you claim to love, but never truly respected. You didn't fail to see my fortune. You failed to see my character. That is a blindness no amount of money can cure. I wish you no ill will. I hope in time you find a way to build a life based on something more substantial than status. Goodbye, Liam. The letter was not cruel. It was simply the truth. It was the final, quiet demolition of the fantasy she was trying to rebuild. He left her there, in the quiet rubble of her family's arrogance, with the most difficult choice of all, to learn from the collapse and build something new and real from the ground up, or to spend the rest of her life mourning the gilded cage she had once called home. 6 months passed. The seasons changed. The city, indifferent to the rise and fall of personal empires, moved on. The name Harrington, once a fixture in the business pages, faded into obscurity. Liam Sterling stood on a windswept 52nd floor balcony looking out over the city. This was not the balcony of his penthouse, but of his real office, the headquarters of Sterling Holdings. The space was a testament to his philosophy, minimalist, functional, and breathtakingly beautiful. The walls were unadorned, the furniture was elegant but understated, and the only real art was the panoramic view of the urban landscape, a living, breathing entity. He was no longer partitioned. The dual life he had maintained for so long had been integrated. He was simply Liam Sterling, a man who happened to be both an architect of buildings and an architect of fortunes. The quietness he had cultivated was still there, but it was no longer a disguise. It was his nature. He had not become what he had destroyed. He had not grown arrogant or cruel. The experience with the Harringtons had been a crucible, burning away the last of his naivete, but leaving the core of his integrity intact, stronger and more refined. Marcus Thorne entered the balcony, holding 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to Liam. The final reports on the Harrington liquidation are in, he said, his voice neutral. It's all gone. They sold the townhouse. Arthur and Eleanor are living in a condo in Florida. Julian is working a mid-level sales job for a paper company in Ohio. He seems humbled. Liam nodded, sipping his coffee. He felt no triumph, no satisfaction, only a quiet sense of resolution, the feeling of a story having reached its natural, inevitable end. And Clara? He asked. Marcus hesitated for a moment. She's in the city, working as an assistant manager at an art gallery. She didn't go with her parents. It seems she's trying to make it on her own. Liam looked out at the horizon. A part of him was glad to hear it. It was a start, a small, difficult first step on the long road to building a life of genuine substance. He hoped she would make it. His attention shifted to the large table inside his office. Unrolled across its surface were the blueprints for his latest project. It wasn't a skyscraper, or a corporate headquarters. It was the design for the new Sterling Foundation Public Library, a sweeping, beautiful structure of glass, steel, and reclaimed wood that he was designing himself. It was a building meant to last for centuries, a place of quiet learning and community, open to everyone regardless of their station. It was the physical manifestation of his values. He was building something that gave back, something that strengthened the foundations of the community, rather than just adding another glittering spire to the skyline. He thought about the nature of wealth and power. The Harringtons had wielded their small fortune like a club, using it to bludgeon others into submission and validate their own egos. They had been loud, ostentatious, and ultimately brittle. Liam had learned from his grandfather that true power was quiet. It was the ability to effect change without needing applause. It was the strength to be underestimated, the patience to be misunderstood, and the wisdom to know that a person's true worth is measured not by the size of their bank account, but by the integrity of their character. He had wanted to be loved for the man he was, not the assets he controlled. The experiment had failed with Clara, but it had not been a failure in principle. It had taught him a valuable lesson, that anyone who requires a demonstration of power or wealth to offer respect is not worth having in your life. Respect must be given freely, or it is worthless. He turned away from the grand vista of the city and back toward the blueprints, the library, a place for quiet growth. He felt a sense of peace settle over him, a sense of purpose that had nothing to do with market shares or stock prices. The storm had passed, the demolition was complete. Now it was time to build. One crisp autumn afternoon, a few months later, Liam stood on the bustling construction site of the new library. The skeleton of the building was already rising, a graceful framework of steel reaching for the sky. He wore a hard hat and a simple work coat over his clothes, looking less like a billionaire and more like the project foreman. He loved being here, amidst the noise and the energy of creation, seeing the lines on his drawings transform into tangible reality. He was reviewing a structural detail with the lead engineer when he noticed a young couple sitting on a nearby bench, sharing a simple lunch from a brown paper bag. They weren't talking much, but their proximity, the easy way the woman leaned her head on the man's shoulder, the smile he gave her, it all spoke of a deep, uncomplicated affection. They were oblivious to the massive construction project, to the city swirling around them, lost in their own small, perfect world. They had something that couldn't be bought, leveraged, or acquired in a hostile takeover. They had genuine connection. A faint smile touched Liam's lips. That was what he had been searching for. It wasn't about finding someone who could live without his wealth. It was about finding someone who could see him so clearly that his wealth became an irrelevant detail, a footnote in the story of who he was as a man. He hadn't found it with Clara, but watching that couple, he felt a renewed sense of hope that it was possible. He realized the end of his relationship with Clara wasn't a tragedy. It was a necessary amputation, removing something that had threatened to poison his belief in the very thing he sought. The narrative of our lives is often defined by such moments of quiet revelation. Liam's story is a powerful reminder that true worth is not a performance. It is not found in the brand of your car, the size of your house, or the title on your business card. True worth is in your character, your integrity, and the quiet dignity with which you treat others, especially those you believe have nothing to offer you. The Harringtons built their world on a glittering facade of status, and it crumbled at the first touch of truth. Liam built his life on a foundation of integrity, and it stood firm, a fortress that arrogance could never breach. He didn't seek revenge. He simply allowed the natural law of consequences to run its course. The justice was poetic because their downfall was a direct result of the very flaws they celebrated as strengths, their arrogance, their greed, and their profound blindness to the value of a person. We've all felt underestimated or judged on superficial things at some point in our lives. What did you think of Liam's response to the Harringtons? Was it the perfect measure of justice, or was it too cold and calculated? We would love to read your thoughts and your own stories in the comments below. If you were moved by this story of quiet strength and ultimate vindication, please give this video a like and consider subscribing to our channel for more tales that explore the hidden depths of human character. Until next time, remember to look past the glittering facades and value the solid foundations, both in the structures we build and in the people we choose to have in our lives.